My girlfriend said, "You're nothing special. Anyone could replace you easily." I agreed quietly and walked away. Months later, she watched from a distance as I became everything she said I wasn't capable of becoming. "You know what your problem is?" She didn't even look up from her phone when she said it. "You're nothing special. Anyone could replace you easily." I stood there in the middle of our kitchen, holding 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for me. And I just went still. Not the kind of still where you're stunned. The kind where something inside you quietly decides something, and you feel it before you understand it. I set her cup down on the counter. I didn't slam it. I didn't spill it. I just placed it there, very gently, like I was setting down something I no longer needed to carry. And then I said the only word I would say for the rest of that conversation. "Okay." She finally looked up. And for just a half second, the briefest flicker, something crossed her face that wasn't irritation. It looked almost like fear. But I was already walking toward the bedroom. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that one quiet word, was the beginning of everything that came after. And everything that came after? She never saw it coming. I should tell you what was at stake before I tell you what happened. Because it wasn't just a relationship. It was 3 years. It was the version of myself I had built around her. The apartment we shared was mine, technically mine, but I had rearranged every corner of it to fit her preferences. The shelves held her books, even though she never read them. The walls had her art prints, even though I'd never liked that style. The kitchen had her brand of everything: coffee, creamer, cereal, even though I paid for all of it. I had quietly, slowly, without ever noticing it happening, made myself smaller to make room for her. And the terrifying part? I had called that love. I didn't realize it then, but that moment with the coffee cups changed everything. Not because it hurt, because it didn't hurt as much as it should have. And that told me something I hadn't been willing to admit in a very long time. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 27. She was 25. We had been together for 3 years and 4 months. Not that I was counting, but I was. We met at a mutual friend's going-away party, the kind where nobody's really close to the person leaving, but everyone shows up anyway, because it's a Saturday night and there's free beer. Her name was Cassandra. "Cass," she insisted. She had this way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, and looking back now, I understand that she had that effect on everyone. It wasn't special treatment. It was just how she operated. But at 23, I didn't know that yet. The first year was the kind of thing you write songs about. Or at least, that's what I told myself. She was ambitious, witty, sharp in ways that made me want to be sharper. I had a decent job in graphic design, freelance mostly, with a few steady clients, and she was working her way up at a marketing agency downtown. We pushed each other, or so I thought. In the second year, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a single moment. It was gradual, the way mold grows on bread. By the time you notice it, it's been there a while. She started commenting on my work. Not in the feedback from a partner way. In the "you might want to lower your expectations" way. "Do you really think this client thing is going to turn into something permanent?" I'm not saying you're not talented. I'm just saying, be realistic. Everyone thinks they're going to make it big freelancing. Most people don't. And I'd nod. And I'd adjust. And I'd somehow convince myself this was her caring about me. By year 3, the comments had become a pattern so consistent I barely registered them anymore. Like background noise. Like traffic outside a window you've stopped hearing. I didn't realize I was slowly starting to believe her. The morning of the coffee incident, that specific morning, hadn't started badly. Nothing dramatic had triggered it. I had just mentioned, casually, that I'd gotten an email about a design competition. Significant one. Nationally recognized. Good prize money. Serious career exposure. I was excited. I remember that feeling clearly. The way your chest lifts when something lands in your lap that feels like possibility. "I'm thinking about submitting a piece," I said. She scrolled her phone. The prize is pretty substantial. And even just being selected would open some doors. You've said that about things before." I paused. "I know, but this one feels different." That's when she finally looked up. Not to encourage me. Not even to engage. She looked up with this expression that I can only describe as tired of me. Not tired for me. Tired of me. And then she said it. "You know what your problem is? You're nothing special. Anyone could replace you. Easily." I lay in bed that night for a long time after she fell asleep. Staring at the ceiling. Not crying. Not angry. Just thinking. And what I kept coming back to wasn't even the words themselves. It was the casualness. The fact that she had said it the way you'd say we're out of milk. No heat, no anger, no emotion. Like it was just a fact she was reporting. Like she had said it so many times inside her own head that saying it out loud felt perfectly normal. And I asked myself the question I had been avoiding for longer than I wanted to admit. When did she start thinking this about me? And then, the worst question, how long had I been giving her reasons to? I want you to understand something about the person I was at that point in my life. I'm not going to pretend I was perfect. I'm not going to paint myself as the innocent victim of a cruel woman, because the truth is messier than that. The truth is, I had spent the last 3 years shrinking. I had stopped entering competitions because she'd thought it was a long shot. I had turned down a collaboration with a designer I admired because she said the timing was bad for us. I had slowly stopped talking about my ambitions because every time I did, I felt the faint but unmistakable energy of someone preparing to manage my expectations. And the saddest part? I had started to do it to myself. Before she could question something, I would question it first. Before she could say, "Do you really think that's realistic?" I would already be backing away from the idea. I had become my own ceiling. I had built her voice into my head and let it run on a loop. And by the time she said those words in the kitchen, I wasn't entirely sure she was wrong. That's the part that kept me up at night. Not her cruelty. My agreement. I didn't leave that morning. Or that week. I know that might frustrate some of you. But here's what nobody tells you about relationships that slowly damage you. Leaving isn't the first thing you feel. The first thing you feel is confusion. Because there are good days woven in between the bad ones. And on the good days, you think, maybe I misread it. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe she's right, and I just don't want to admit it. So you stay, and you wait, and you watch yourself for evidence that she's either wrong or right. The competition submission deadline was in 3 weeks. I submitted my piece anyway. I didn't tell her. I just did it. Quietly. Alone. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while she watched TV in the next room. I hit submit, and I sat there, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Pride. Just a small, fragile, private kind of pride. But it was mine, and she hadn't touched it. I should tell you about Owen. He was my closest friend, had been since college, and he was the only person who ever looked at me sideways when I talked about my relationship. He never pushed. He was never the type to say, "She sounds terrible, you should leave." But he had this way of going quiet when I told him stories about Cass. A particular kind of quiet. The kind that said, "I'm not going to say what I'm thinking because you're not ready to hear it." About 2 weeks after the coffee cup morning, I told him what she had said. The exact words. He went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "What did you do?" I said okay and walked away. Another pause. And then what? I submitted the competition piece. The longest pause yet. And then he smiled. Not a big smile, but the specific kind you give someone when something you've been waiting for finally happens. "Good," he said. Just that. Good. The results from the competition came on a Thursday morning. I remember because it was raining, that gray, heavy kind of rain that makes the whole world feel like it's underwater. I was at my desk when the email came in. My hands were doing that involuntary trembling thing before I even opened it. I read the subject line 3 times. "Congratulations, selected finalist, National Design Competition." I sat very still for about 10 seconds. And then I put my headphones on, turned on music, and cried quietly into my coffee for a minute and a half. Not because I won. I hadn't won. Finalist. But finalist in that competition meant something. It meant exposure. It meant my name alongside designers who had entire studios, entire teams, entire careers built out of nothing but their own vision. And I had gotten there. Alone. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. While she watched TV in the next room. I didn't tell Cass that night. I kept waiting for the right moment. And what I discovered, waiting for that moment, was that there was no right moment, because I no longer trusted her reaction. I didn't know if she would be genuinely happy for me. I didn't know if she'd find a way to minimize it. And the fact that I couldn't tell, after 3 years, was its own kind of answer. I told Owen instead. He showed up at my door that evening with a bottle of whiskey and one of those prepared speeches you can tell someone has been holding on to. "You know what I think this means?" he said, settling into the couch. "That I got lucky," I said out of habit. He gave me that look. "That's not what this means." "Then what?" "It means you still have it. You still have the thing. You were starting to act like it left you, and it didn't. It's been sitting there this whole time, waiting for you to stop listening to the wrong person." I didn't respond to that directly. I poured the whiskey. But I heard it, and I didn't argue with it. Because somewhere, underneath everything, underneath 3 years of quiet erosion, I knew he was right. I finally told Cass the following morning. Just mentioned it over breakfast. Casual. Like she had been casual. Oh, by the way, I was selected as a finalist in that design competition I mentioned. She looked up. The national one? Yeah. A pause. Huh. She went back to her phone. Huh. That was it. One syllable. And I sat there with my toast and my coffee, and I waited. I waited for anything. Congratulations. That's great. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I said what I said. Anything. Nothing. She scrolled. She sipped. She put her plate in the sink, and she said she'd be home late, and she left. And I sat at that table for a long time. Not sad. Not exactly. More like someone had handed me the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on for months. It clicked into place, and now I could see the whole picture. I didn't make a dramatic decision. There was no screaming match. No throwing things. No ultimatum. I just started, very quietly, building something. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. I took the finalist recognition and I used it. I reached out to the designer I had turned down because the timing wasn't right. His name was Conrad, mid-40s, based out of the Pacific Northwest, with a portfolio that made me want to work harder every time I looked at it. He remembered me. He was still interested. We started talking. Meanwhile, the competition exposure had already brought 2 new client inquiries into my inbox. Not huge clients, but real ones. Ones who had found me through the finalist list. Ones who saw my work before they saw anything else about me. I worked in the mornings before Cass woke up. I worked in the evenings after she fell asleep. I worked through lunches I'd previously spent scrolling alongside her. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I just worked. She noticed about 3 weeks in. Not because she was paying close attention, but because I had stopped filling the silence. Before, I had been a constant presence in her orbit, asking how her day was, suggesting dinner plans, absorbing her moods, and adjusting mine accordingly. Now I was just separate. Still there, but separate. She found me at my desk late one night. "You've been weird lately," she said. "Just busy," I said without turning around. "With what?" "Work." A pause. "More freelance stuff?" She said it with that particular inflection, not quite dismissive, but almost. The one that had always made me shrink. "Yeah," I said, and I kept typing. She stood there for a moment, then went back to bed. I sat with the quiet after she left, and something felt different about it. The quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt like space. Room to breathe. Room to think. Room to be someone she hadn't decided I couldn't be. The collaboration with Conrad started slowly. He was methodical, careful, deliberate, the kind of designer who would sit with a concept for weeks before committing to a direction. I was faster, more instinctual. Turns out, we balanced each other perfectly. Our first joint project was a brand identity for a boutique outdoor gear company. Small project, but the work we produced was not small. It was some of the best work I had ever done. And when I say that, I don't mean in a self-congratulatory way. I mean it the way you know when something is right, when the thing you made actually matches the thing you imagined. That gap between vision and execution that used to frustrate me, for the first time in a long time, it had closed. Conrad noticed. "You've been holding back," he told me over a video call. "What?" "This work. It's good. It's really good. But it feels like something that was waiting. Like you had it and just wasn't using it." I didn't tell him why, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. I'll be honest with you about something. During those weeks, those early weeks of building, I still hadn't fully left. Not emotionally. Not physically. Cass and I were still sharing the apartment, still sharing a bed. We weren't fighting. We weren't close either. We were 2 people in the same space, orbiting each other without touching. There's a particular loneliness in that. Worse than being alone, I think. Because alone, you know where you stand. In that in-between space, you're just floating. And I was asking myself every day, is this salvageable? Is there still something here? Or have I just been too afraid to admit it's over? The answer came from her, the way these things often do. Not in a dramatic revelation. In a small moment. A Tuesday evening. She came home from work with her colleague, a guy named Brendan, mid-30s, confident, the kind of guy who took up space in a room and knew it. They had been working late on a campaign together. She had mentioned him before, always in passing. I thought nothing of it, until I saw the way she laughed at something he said before they even got through the door. Not her usual laugh. The other one. The one I hadn't heard in a long time. The one I used to be the reason for. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't snoop. I didn't spiral into accusations. I just went to bed and lay there and knew. You know how you can feel the truth before you can prove it? Before you have receipts, before you have evidence, Before there's anything you could hold up and point to? You just know. Like a smell. Like a pressure change before a storm. I knew. And the strangest thing was, I wasn't destroyed by it. I was just done. Finally. Completely. Done. The next morning I called Owen. I'm leaving, I said. Okay, he said. Not surprised. Not even a pause. Just okay. I need a few days to sort logistics. Can I stay with you? Already have the couch ready, he said. And I almost laughed. Almost. You've been waiting for this call for a while, haven't you? He paused. About 8 months, he said. You never said anything. You weren't ready, he said. Now you are. I picked a moment when Cass was at work. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I didn't want a scene. I didn't want crying or bargaining or any of the messy theater of a breakup where one person is blindsided and one person has already made peace. I had already made peace. I wanted to spare us both the performance. I packed what mattered. My equipment. My hard drives. My sketchbooks. 15 of them. Going back to college. Full of ideas I had never executed because I had been too busy managing someone else's comfort. I left the apartment clean. I left her coffee creamer in the fridge. I left a note on the counter, 1 page, handwritten. It wasn't angry. It wasn't petty. It was just honest. 3 paragraphs. The first said what I had felt. The second said what I had needed. The third said why I was leaving. No cruelty. No call out. Just truth. And then I was out the door. Owen's couch lasted 11 days. Not because of him. He would have let me stay indefinitely. But because on day 11, I signed a lease on a small studio. Top floor of a building 4 miles across town. 1 large window facing west. No art on the walls. No one else's furniture. No one else's preferences built into every corner. Just a room. My room. And the terrifying, thrilling, nearly overwhelming feeling of starting from nothing. I want to tell you the next 6 months didn't feel cinematic. Because they didn't. They felt like work. Unglamorous, relentless, sometimes maddening work. There were nights I questioned every decision I had made. Not about leaving Cass specifically, but about the scope of what I was attempting. The boutique outdoor gear project with Conrad had wrapped, and the response had been strong enough that we decided to formalize our partnership. Not an agency exactly. A studio. 2-person, lean, intentional. We called it what it was. No clever wordplay. No ironic lowercase. Just the work. Clients started coming to us through referrals. One led to another. The pace picked up. There were weeks I worked 14-hour days. There were mornings I woke up at 4 a.m. because an idea wouldn't wait. And through all of it, I noticed something. I wasn't exhausted the way I used to be. I was tired, yes. But it was the good kind of tired. The earned kind. The kind you feel when you've actually used yourself up on something worth building. The first sign that the outside world was starting to notice came about 4 months after the move. A trade publication, respected in the design world, the kind that actual professionals read, not just aspirants, ran a piece on emerging independent studios. Ours was featured, not as the lead, but in there, with quotes from Conrad and me, with images of the work, with our names attached to something that had weight. I read the article 3 times in my studio, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, holding my phone with both hands. I didn't post it online. I texted it to Owen with no caption. He replied with 1 word and 3 exclamation marks. That was enough. I don't know exactly when Cass found out. I don't know if she saw the article. I don't know if mutual friends mentioned it. I don't know if she happened to come across my work somewhere. It was being shared more, linked more, discussed in places I hadn't anticipated. What I know is that about 5 months after I left, I got a message from her. Not a call. A message. Hey, I saw what you've been doing. Looks like things are going well. I read it 3 times. I thought about what to say. I thought about it for a long time. And then I put my phone face down on my desk. And I kept working. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness. Not out of revenge. I just genuinely didn't have anything to say. There was no version of a response that would have served me. No version that would have added anything to my life. She had said what she said. I had done what I had done. And the distance between those 2 events had become the whole story. The moment she watched from a distance, the moment the title of this story refers to, happened about 2 months after that message. There was a design showcase. Annual event. Not huge by industry standards, but significant. Attended by studios, agencies, clients, and the kind of people who make decisions that matter in the creative world. Our studio had been invited to present a segment of our work. Conrad handled the logistics. I handled the presentation. I had rehearsed it probably 40 times. Not because I was terrified of public speaking, but because this work meant something to me, and I wanted to represent it properly. The venue was a converted warehouse downtown. High ceilings, exposed beams, the kind of space that makes everything inside it feel like it matters. I arrived early, set up, did the checks, talked to a few people I'd been wanting to connect with in person. It was about 30 minutes before our segment when I saw her. Across the room, she was there with someone from her agency, possibly Brendan. I couldn't be certain from that distance. She hadn't seen me yet. I watched her for maybe 3 seconds. She looked the same, maybe a little more tired around the eyes, but the same. And I waited for the feeling to tell me what it was. Anger? No. Hurt? No. Something that wanted to go say something cutting and satisfying? No. What I felt was closer to neutral. The way you feel when you pass the street you used to live on and you notice it without any particular pull. Just, I used to be there. I am not there now. That's fine. She saw me during the presentation. I know because I was looking out at the room, holding eye contact with the audience the way you do when you're presenting, moving your gaze through the crowd so no one feels excluded. And when I swept past her section of the room, I saw the moment she recognized me. The small shift, the posture change, the thing that happens in someone's face when they see something they didn't expect. I didn't stop. I didn't pause. I kept going. Because the presentation wasn't for her. It had never been for her. The response to our segment was strong. 2 potential clients approached us directly afterward. One of them became a significant contract within a month. Conrad and I stood in the corner of that warehouse at the end of the night, drinks in hand, talking about the next phase, where we wanted to take this, what kind of work we wanted to be known for, what we were willing to turn down to protect the quality of what we accepted. These were not the conversations I had with myself 3 years ago. These were not the conversations of someone who had quietly agreed that he wasn't special. These were the conversations of someone who had decided, who had simply, finally, chosen. I saw Cass once more that evening. On her way out, she passed close enough that there was a moment, brief but real, where we made eye contact. She started to say something. I could see it forming, the opening of the mouth, the breath before words. And I gave her the smallest, most genuine smile I had. Not a smug one, not a look at me now smile. Just a smile that said, I'm okay. I'm really actually okay. And then I turned back to Conrad and kept talking. I heard her heels on the concrete floor, moving toward the exit. And then she was gone. And I felt nothing that required any attention. I need to tell you what I've come to understand about that kitchen moment. The coffee cup morning. The, you're nothing special, anyone could replace you morning. Because it wasn't the cruelest thing anyone has ever said. And she wasn't the villain of some simple story. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that she had believed it. She genuinely believed it. And the sadder truth? I had given her reason to. Not because I was actually replaceable. Not because I was actually ordinary. But because I had behaved that way for long enough that it had become the only version of me she had ever seen. I had hidden my ambition because I was afraid she'd puncture it. I had stopped reaching because I was anticipating rejection before it came. I had made myself small and then wondered why someone couldn't see my full size. She was wrong about me. Completely wrong. But I had been wrong about me first. And that specific realization, that was the one that actually changed things. Not the anger, not the hurt, not the I'll show her. It was the moment I understood that the rebuilding wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about proving it to the version of me that had started to believe her. The version that submitted the competition piece at 11:47 p.m. in secret. The version that was terrified to hope. That version needed to see what was possible. That was who I was working for. Every 14-hour day. Every early morning idea. Every project I pushed past comfortable into something that actually required all of me. I wasn't building toward revenge. I was building toward myself. The self that had been there the whole time. Waiting quietly under all those years of managed expectations and borrowed ceilings. Owen asked me once, about 8 months after everything, over dinner at his place, whether I thought about her much. I had to actually think before I answered. Not really, I said. Good or bad, not really. Just, not really. Like, she's a chapter. I finished reading it. I'm on the next one. He nodded. Any part of you wishes she could see how things turned out? Another pause. She did see, I said. At the showcase. Right. And I thought about it. The way she'd looked across that room. The way something had shifted in her face. And nothing, I said. That's the whole point. It was nothing. It didn't need to be anything. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, that's how you know you're actually done. I picked up my fork. Yeah, I said. That's how you know. The studio has 12 clients now. Some small, some significant. Conrad and I have turned down work that would have excited me 2 years ago. Turned it down because we've decided what we want to be, and certain projects don't fit that. Being able to say no is its own kind of success. I have my own office inside the studio space now. I repainted the walls myself last spring. The color I chose. Nobody else weighed in. Nobody else managed my expectations about whether it would look good. I just painted the walls the color I wanted and sat in the room and felt something so simple it almost embarrassed me. Content. Just genuinely, quietly content. I got another message from Cass about 6 months after the showcase. Longer this time. A real message. She wrote about how she'd been doing. She wrote about some changes she was making in her life. She wrote, and I'll be honest, I read this part several times, that she had been thinking about things she'd said to me. Things she hadn't handled well. She didn't use the word sorry directly, but it was there in the structure of the message, in the between lines of it. I sat with it for a few days, and then I wrote back. Short, not warm, not cold, just human. I told her I hoped she was well. I told her I was in a good place. I told her I bore no ill will. I sent it and closed the app. I haven't heard from her since, and I don't expect to, and that's a complete sentence. There's something I want to say to whoever is listening to this. Not advice. I'm not qualified to give you advice, but just something I want to put into words because it took me a long time to understand it. The most dangerous thing someone can do to you is not the cruelty they deliver. It's the cruelty you absorb. The words that find the crack in your confidence and settle there. The doubts that weren't yours originally but become yours through repetition. The gradual, nearly invisible process of starting to agree with your own diminishment. She said, "You're nothing special." But the damage wasn't done the day she said it. The damage was done across hundreds of smaller moments before that. The turned down collaborations, the abandoned ambitions, the competitions I hadn't entered, the ideas I'd quietly buried before they could be criticized. She gave language to something I had already been practicing on myself. And the moment I understood that, truly understood it, was the moment I stopped being a victim of that story. Because if I had participated in the erosion, I could also participate in the rebuilding. And I did. Quietly. Doggedly. Without announcement. One submission at 11:47 p.m. One yes to Conrad. One studio. One presentation in a converted warehouse. One room painted exactly the color I chose. I am not the same person who stood in that kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee. I want to be clear about what I mean. Not better than her. Not I won the breakup. Those framings are too small for what I'm trying to say. What I mean is, I am more fully myself. I take up more of my own life. I make decisions from a place that isn't fear. I pursue things that matter to me without first running them through someone else's probability of success. I entered a competition at 11:47 p.m. and hit submit and felt proud. That sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. It was the beginning of understanding that I was the only person whose permission I needed. Months after the showcase, a younger designer reached out to me. Mid-20s. Freelancing, struggling, doubting. He had come across our studio's work somewhere online and had sent a long, earnest message about feeling stuck. About feeling like he wasn't special enough. About wondering if the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be was too wide to cross. I read his message twice, and then I wrote him back. Not a lecture. Not a motivational paragraph. I just told him, submit the piece. Whatever the piece is. The thing you've been sitting on because you're afraid of what it might mean if it fails. Submit it. And then wake up the next morning and do the next thing. That's the whole method. That's all of it. He wrote back a few weeks later. He had submitted something. A small competition. He was selected. Nothing huge. But something. He wrote one sentence that I've thought about more than anything else from that whole period. I forgot that I was allowed to try. I think about that sentence sometimes. Late at night. When the studio is quiet and I'm the last one there and the light from my screen is the only light in the room. I forgot that I was allowed to try. I know that feeling. I lived in it for 3 years. And I know what it costs. And I know what it feels like to remember. She said I was nothing special. She said anyone could replace me easily. She said it the way you report facts. The way you say we're out of milk. I agreed quietly. I placed the coffee cup down. And I walked away. And then I worked. And then I built. And then months later, in a converted warehouse with high ceilings and exposed beams, she watched from across the room as I stood in front of an audience and presented work that had my name on it. Work that was undeniable. Work that existed because I had finally stopped agreeing with the wrong voice. She watched. And I smiled. And I turned back to Conrad. And I kept going. The coffee cup is still on the counter of that old apartment somewhere in my memory. I left it there. I don't need to go back for it. Everything I needed, it turns out, I had already packed. Some people will only believe in you after you prove them wrong. Don't wait for their permission to begin.